Let's explore the cellular map. It's an example of a 3D procedural map, and it differs significantly from the 2D patterns that you've used previously. Assign a map to the diffuse color component as always, and in the browser choose the 3D Maps radio button. Select Cellular, which is at the top of the list. Try to show the map in the viewport, and you'll see that you can't, and you might assume that this is because the object lacks texture coordinates. But that's actually not the case. If you do a test rendering or open up the Active Shade viewport, you'll see the pattern appear on the object. And this is important to understand because it gets to the heart of what 3D procedural maps are all about. They work with spatial coordinates, and you can see that right here in the coordinates rollout. They do not require texture coordinates in order to work. The coordinates rollout looks different than the 2D pattern coordinates rollout. Here you'll notice that there's no ability to turn on real world map. That feature is not available here because we're calculating this mathematical algorithm based upon the volume of the object. I think the easiest way to understand that is to go down here to the cellular parameters rollout and increase the size of the pattern. Right now it's a little too small to appreciate. I'll change the size from 5 to 25, and now you'll be able to make out the individual cells of the pattern. Notice that these cells are not interrupted by the changing planes here between curved surface and flat surface. This is because the algorithm is defined throughout the volume, and so it isn't concerned about the surface. It's going to display correctly no matter how you cut the surface. And that's one of the nice things about it. You don't have to worry about stretching that pattern out and fitting it onto the surface. It's deep in the substance, if you will. Now the cellular pattern is controlled here. I'll change one of the colors just to give you an idea. They don't have to be grayscale colors. It can be any color you want. You can also map those colors with an additional map. And again, that's a little bit too deep at this point in your understanding. Now let's go back up here and take a look at the coordinates rollout again. You can offset the pattern, tile it, or change its angle, and these should be familiar functions to you by now. You can also blur the pattern as a whole or anti-alias it here. Now this might be all you need, but if you have multiple objects that use this material, you might want to adjust the pattern at the object level, and that's possible. Change the coordinate source to explicit map channel. Note that this is not the default. When I do that, I get this warning that's actually given to me by Active Shade because it's trying to render the image, and now it can't because the box doesn't have texture coordinates. Let me cancel that and close Active Shade. I'll go over here and assign the UVW map to the object. Now to get this to appear correctly, I should turn off real world map size, which really doesn't work here with a procedural map. And I'll change the mapping type to this option. This converts the spatial coordinates to texture coordinates. Now I should be able to render it without getting a warning. Now the tiling of the pattern can be adjusted at the object level. Perhaps I want to increase the number of repetitions in the vertical dimension. I'll do that here. And I'll reinitialize Active Shade. and you can see more cells in the vertical direction. Now, a funny thing about procedural maps is that they can be displayed in the viewport, but it's kind of a cheat. Let me go back here to the coordinates rollout in the material map and change the source back to object XYZ. Notice that now I still see the pattern here in the viewport. Let me choose the box type of mapping here, and the pattern looks not correct, but better. And that's because what we're doing here in the viewport is plastering a 2D version of that pattern onto the surfaces of the box. And that's why we're getting this weird interference in the middle here. This gives us at least an approximate representation in the viewport, which can be useful. But just be aware that this is irrelevant as far as the rendering goes, because it's being calculated based on the spatial coordinates of the object. It doesn't even need texture coordinates. You'll see that if you make a rendering or use ActiveShade. It looks accurate, unlike the viewport representation. But that said, it is useful to be able to preview it here without having to do a rendering.